Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled, The Forest's Legacy: A Rebirth of Shadows. Chapter 1, The Journey Home. The train rumbled steadily beneath the dusky sky, its whistle slicing through the early evening air as it wound its way through hills cloaked in wild grass and golden light. Silas leaned his head against the window pane, the cool glass pressing gently against his temple. His breath briefly fogged the glass before vanishing, just like the years he'd spent away. It had been 17 years since he left the village of Eldon Hollow an age ago, it seemed. He had boarded a similar train back then, only younger, hungrier for the world, and unaware of what he was leaving behind. Now, older, more worn and quieter, he was returning not as a boy seeking adventure, but as a man chasing echoes. The sky beyond the window was painted in deep violets and blush reds. Silas watched the silhouettes of trees dance past, blurred by the motion of the train but not so fast that he couldn't feel their familiarity. Somewhere behind those trees lay a village nearly forgotten by time, a place stitched into the very seams of his childhood yet frayed by distance and silence. The seat beside him was empty, save for a battered leather satchel. Inside, a small parcel wrapped in wax paper gave off the faint aroma of citrus and old cedar, an old tea blend from the corner shop in Caldhurst Alley, the last gift from his mentor before he left the city. As the train slowed with a subtle jolt, the station crept into view. It was smaller than he remembered, or maybe everything else had grown larger in his mind. A lone lantern cast a honeyed glow over the platform, and a stray cat darted beneath a bench as the train hissed to a stop. Silas stepped off, his boots touching down on cobblestone worn smooth by decades of arriving feet and farewell tears. The air here was different, thicker somehow, as if it remembered him. He stood still for a moment, the night breeze brushing past his coat, carrying the scent of pine, smoke, and something warm, bread, maybe. There was no one to greet him. No familiar face waiting with a grin, no hand to shake or embrace to fall into. But he hadn't expected any. Most who would have waited were long gone or long changed. He adjusted the strap of his satchel and walked forward, the crunch of gravel beneath his steps a steady rhythm. The path leading away from the station was the same narrow trail lined with uneven stones and overgrown weeds. Fireflies flickered in the air like living stars, blinking in and out of view. As he walked, the memories came unbidden. The old bakery near the square where Mrs. Alwyn once sold sugared buns. The gnarled oak tree that stood like a guardian at the curve of the road. The scent of wet earth after a summer storm. He remembered sprinting through puddles with his brother, laughing until their sides ached, and collapsing under the tree to watch the clouds reshape the sky. But Eldon Hollow wasn't just nostalgia. It held questions. Why had he dreamed about it so often these past months? Why now, after all these years, had something inside him stirred with such aching urgency? Half an hour later, he reached the ridge where the road sloped downward toward the valley. From here, the village revealed itself like a memory long buried stone cottages with moss-covered roofs, winding footpaths, and the glimmer of lantern light behind windows. Beyond it all stood the old house, his grandfather's house, perched at the edge of the forest, shadowed and still. Silas exhaled. He hadn't ridden ahead. Part of him had feared the place would be gone, sold off or collapsed. But he had to see it for himself. Crossing the worn wooden bridge over a quiet stream, he caught sight of a lantern swaying gently by the garden gate. A familiar one. Its frame bent at the top where he had once kicked a ball too high and knocked it loose. The house hadn't changed much. Ivy climbed its weathered stone walls, and the front porch creaked just the same when he stepped onto it. The key was still hidden beneath the loose tile in the third step. Some things, it seemed, remained untouched by time. Inside, the scent hit him like a soft blow: lavender, smoke, and old paper. The air was colder than outside, but it wrapped around him like a memory. He didn't light the lantern right away. He stood in the quiet, listening to the tick of the old clock, to the wind against the window panes, to the past breathing through the floorboards. It was strange how silence could be so loud. Silas stepped into the sitting room. The armchair by the fire was empty, a knitted blanket draped neatly over its back. His grandfather's books still lined the shelves, rows of old myths, nature journals, and letters bundled in twine. He sat down on the rug, letting his hand rest on the wooden floorboards, feeling their faint warmth. He had come home, but he wasn't sure what he was meant to find. Then he noticed something. A folded sheet of parchment lay on the table beside the armchair. It wasn't there by accident. Dust hadn't yet claimed it. With a frown, Silas reached for it. The note was short, written in a hand he didn't recognize. Welcome back. There are things you must remember. Not all stories end. Some begin again. He read it twice, then again. A flicker of something moved beneath his ribs: doubt, curiosity, or perhaps the first breath of a story not yet told. Outside, the wind rose slightly, and somewhere in the forest, a bell rang, one soft and hollow. And Silas knew, deep down, that the journey he thought was ending had only just begun. Chapter 2, Lanterns in the Fog. The morning sun had yet to rise, but Silas was already awake. He sat on the porch with his coat pulled around him, a steaming mug of the citrus and cedar tea warming his hands. The world before him was shrouded in mist, gentle, silver tendrils curling along the stone path and hugging the hedgerows. The village below was hidden, wrapped in a slumbering fog as if the night hadn't quite let go. A stillness clung to everything, as though time itself paused to take a breath. Silas sipped the tea slowly, letting the quiet seep into him. His gaze wandered toward the gate, where the bent lantern still swayed faintly in the breeze. It hadn't lit up last night, not by his hand, and yet it had been burning when he arrived. That much he was sure of. He stood and stepped off the porch, boots pressing softly into the damp earth. The scent of dew and moss hung thick in the air, mingling with distant hints of firewood. He followed the narrow trail back toward the village, curious to see if anything remained of the places he once knew or if everything had faded into the fog of memory. Eldon Hollow, even now, moved with a quiet rhythm of its own. The footpath meandered through the trees, each branch reaching down like arms offering welcome. Silas ran his fingers across the bark of an old ash tree as he passed. It had a gash in its side where he once carved a crude symbol as a child. The mark was still faintly there. After a few minutes of walking, he reached the main lane that wound through the heart of the village. Stone cottages with shuttered windows lined the road. Their chimneys were just beginning to release ribbons of smoke into the gray morning air. A soft jingle reached his ears. He turned. A figure emerged from the fog, pushing a wooden cart filled with bundles of kindling and herbs. She was slight, her shawl trailing behind her like a wisp. When she noticed him, she stopped, tilting her head in quiet recognition. "You're the Ashbourne boy," she said softly. Her voice was light, almost musical. "Silas, isn't it?" He blinked. "Yes. I didn't expect anyone to remember." "I remember you chasing chickens across my garden," she replied with a small smile. "And stealing apples from the schoolyard tree." He chuckled. "Guilty on both counts." "I'm Myra," she said. "You may not remember me. I was a few years older, always reading by the fountain." "Now that you mention it," Silas tilted his head. "You used to carry a red book everywhere." "It was orange," she corrected, eyes gleaming. "But close enough." They walked together down the lane, her cart creaking as they moved. The fog had begun to lift, revealing familiar places: the old clock tower, now overgrown with ivy. The bakery with its shutters still painted yellow. And the fountain, where Myra once sat with her orange book, its basin now filled with autumn leaves and the faint trickle of water. "Most have left," she said, breaking the quiet. "Some went to the cities. Some just disappeared." "Disappeared." She nodded, her fingers tightening on the cart's handle. "There are rumors. Whispers. About the forest. About things. Stirring again." Silas felt a chill, not from the air. He remembered the letter from the night before. "There are things you must remember." They paused by the fountain. Myra looked at him, expression soft but searching. "You came back for a reason, didn't you?" "I don't know," he said. "Something called me. I started dreaming of this place again. Of the house. Of the forest." Myra's gaze drifted past him, toward the woods that framed the edge of the village. "You should be careful near the tree line," she said quietly. "Especially at dusk. Things have changed. Before he could ask more, she straightened. Come by the market square later. I sell teas, charms, and books now. I'll find you something to help with the dreams. With that, she turned and disappeared into the mist. Silas stood alone again, the fog slowly lifting as the sun began to break through the clouds. He looked back toward the forest. The trees stood still, solemn and unmoving, but something about them felt aware. Like watchers. He made his way toward the old schoolhouse, now abandoned. Its door hung ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. The building, once full of children's laughter and chalk dust, now creaked with age and silence. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of light. Desks lay scattered, and the blackboard still bore faded writing from a lesson long forgotten. Silas walked to the back corner and knelt. Beneath a loose floorboard, he found it, the tin box he and his brother had buried years ago. Inside were relics of another time: an old marble, a drawing of a dragon, a small whistle carved from driftwood. He lifted the whistle and brought it to his lips, blowing a soft, mournful note that echoed through the empty room. Suddenly, from somewhere outside, the old village bell rang again once. Just like last night. Silas turned toward the sound, heart quickening. And deep in the forest, something stirred. Chapter 3, The Whispering Trail. The morning had ripened into a golden hush. The last strands of mist were dissolving into sunbeams as Silas left the village square, a paper bag of dried rose-leaf tea from Myra tucked under his arm. The cobbled streets gave way to a dirt trail, the very one he had run down countless times as a child, barefoot and breathless, chasing the wind. It hadn't changed. Every bend in the path, every dip and rise, was etched into his bones. The trees still leaned in close, their branches brushing together with a sound like whispers between old friends. The moss-covered stones lining the edge of the trail were as crooked as ever, and he spotted the same toppled milestone that had once served as the base of 1,000 childhood forts. But now, walking it again, there was a strange reverence in his steps. He was no longer the boy who saw the world as endless. He was a man returning to where the world had once begun. The sunlight filtered through the canopy in shards, laying soft patterns across the trail. Birds chirped, unseen, and a squirrel darted past, its fluffy tail a blur. He breathed in the scent of pine, dry leaves, and distant honeysuckle, a scent that anchored him in memory. He reached a wooden bridge, aged and groaning slightly under his weight. Beneath it, a stream trickled lazily, glinting in the light like strands of silver thread. On the other side was the grove, the sacred place of their childhood, where he and his brother had built tree houses, invented kingdoms, and named every stone. He paused, fingers trailing along the bridge's railing. There, carved into the wood, were the initials, S+E, encased in a crooked heart. Silas ran his thumb across them slowly. Evan. His brother. The name struck like a wave against a seawall, unexpected, forceful, and filled with the bittersweet sting of time. Evan had left the village before Silas. The last letter Silas received from him had been over a decade ago. Since then, silence. A chill swept over him despite the sun. He crossed the bridge. The trees here grew taller, older. Shadows lingered longer beneath their limbs. The air thickened, quieter, more secretive. It was the kind of place that felt watched not by people, but by the land itself. Every so often, he would spot something, a rusted horseshoe nailed to a tree, a faded ribbon fluttering from a branch, or the remnants of a child's toy half buried in the soil. Offerings, warnings, or memories. It was hard to say. Then he heard it. A soft sound almost like a lullaby carried on the wind. He turned sharply, but saw no one. Just the trees. And then the whispering began. It was faint, like wind through leaves, but it carried syllables broken, breathless. At first he thought it was just in his mind. But it grew clearer, more urgent. Silas. The voice was neither male nor female, neither old nor young. It was simply there. All around. Inside him. He froze, pulse racing. He stepped off the trail, drawn deeper into the grove. His boots sank into soft earth, and the sunlight barely pierced through the leaves now. The air was cooler. Time, slower. The whisper came again. Return what was left behind. He spun around, heart hammering. Who's there? No answer. Just wind. He kept walking, eyes scanning for something, anything. Then he saw it. A clearing, ringed by white stones. At its center, a single tree stood tall, twisted, ancient, its bark blackened in places, and its roots exposed like claws gripping the earth. At the base of the tree lay a bundle. He approached slowly, breath held. The bundle was wrapped in cloth gray, weathered. It looked like it had been there a long time, and yet not. He knelt beside it, hesitating. With trembling hands, he unfolded the cloth. Inside, nestled among dried leaves and feathers, was a carved wooden figure. A small knight with a sword raised and a cracked shield. He recognized it instantly. It was his. A toy he'd lost the summer before Evan left. He had cried for days when it vanished. How had it ended up here? He turned the figure over. On the bottom, etched in tiny letters, "We made this together." The world tilted. Suddenly, the whisper returned louder, closer. Some bonds are not broken, only buried. He staggered back, clutching the figure to his chest. The trees pulsed with presence now, not malevolent but not entirely kind either. A forest that remembered. Silas turned and ran. Back down the trail, across the bridge, through the dappled light and shadows that clung like cobwebs. He didn't stop until he saw the rooftops of Eldon Hollow again, smoke curling lazily from chimneys, the world seemingly untouched. But something had changed. In his pocket, the wooden knight was warm. Chapter 4, Beneath the Dust. The door to the old house creaked open with a sigh, like it too remembered him. Silas stood on the threshold, the weight of the wooden knight in his pocket grounding him. Morning had given way to late afternoon, the sun bleeding soft amber light across the fields behind him. Dust motes spun lazily through the air, catching sunlight like golden flecks of memory. He stepped inside. The scent hit him immediately: lavender, aged wood, and faint smoke. It was exactly as he remembered, and yet not. There was a stillness here, not empty, but waiting. The kind of quiet that settled in old places not from abandonment, but from watching. The sitting room greeted him like an old friend. The armchair by the fire, now covered in a knitted throw the color of seafoam. The fireplace was empty but still held traces of ash, as if someone had sat there not too long ago, warming their hands against the chill. Above the mantel hung the same painting, his grandmother's garden, painted in oils by Evan the summer before he vanished. Silas walked past it slowly, his fingers brushing over the familiar edges of furniture. Every creak of the floorboard felt like an echo of childhood. The hallway still sloped slightly to the left, the second step still squeaked under his weight. At the end of the hall, the staircase spiraled upward, shrouded in deeper shadow. But he didn't go up. Not yet. Instead, he entered the study, his grandfather's sanctuary. Dust blanketed the room like a soft shroud. Bookshelves lined the walls, stuffed with volumes on nature, myth, and local folklore. The desk was untouched, papers stacked in a neat but slightly disordered fashion as if someone had intended to return but never did. He sat down at the desk and opened the top drawer. Inside were a handful of yellowed maps, a fountain pen, and strangely a small envelope sealed with deep green wax. His brow furrowed. He broke the seal. Inside, there was a folded page and a pressed flower-dried lavender, still fragrant. The paper had a date, June 3rd, 17 years ago. Silas began to read. If you're reading this, Silas, then you've come home. Maybe you've already felt the pull, maybe not. Either way, I owe you the truth. I left not because I wanted to. I left because I had to. Something was waking in the woods. The grove isn't what it seems. It never was. There are voices in the trees, ancient ones. I thought I could follow them, understand them. But I was wrong. The wooden knight. That was your anchor. I hid it so they couldn't reach you. I think they're still watching, still waiting. If I don't come back, know that I never stopped looking for a way through. I'll be where the roots meet the stone. E. Silas read it 3 times. His fingers trembled slightly as he set it down. The scent of the lavender suddenly felt more piercing, more alive. He turned the envelope over, but there was nothing else. Where the roots meet the stone. The words haunted him. He stood and moved to the window, pulling back the faded curtains. The forest was visible from here, just beyond the edge of the yard. Silent, still. Watching. A gust of wind rustled the leaves outside, and he flinched as a soft knock echoed behind him. But no one was there. He turned in place, heart thudding. And then he heard it. The clock. The old grandfather clock in the hallway had stopped working long ago. Yet now, it ticked. Loud and deliberate. He stepped into the hall. The pendulum swung. Tick. Tock. Tick. On instinct, Silas reached for the panel at the base of the clock, something he hadn't done since he was a child. Behind it was a hollowed compartment they once used to hide trinkets and candy. But now, he found something else. A key. Old, iron rod, with an oak leaf engraved into the handle. He turned it in his hand, wondering where it might belong. The attic. Of course. The key had once been part of a game, The Key to the Forgotten Room, Evan called it. But their grandfather had always said the attic was off limits. Dangerous. Too old, he'd said. Too much history. Silas took a candle from the mantel and lit it with a match. The stair creaked beneath his feet as he climbed. Cobwebs clung to the railing, and the smell of dust grew thicker with every step. At the top, the attic door waited. He fit the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. The door opened slowly, revealing darkness and a sharp burst of stale air. He held the candle high and stepped inside. The attic was vast, filled with draped furniture and wooden trunks. Dust swirled in the candlelight, and every sound was amplified: the creak of the floorboards, the soft flicker of the flame. He explored carefully, brushing aside fabric and opening boxes. Toys, photo albums, dried flowers, and brittle letters from another century. Then he saw it. A mirror. Tall, silver-framed, and veiled in white cloth. He stepped closer, breath-catching. With a slow hand, he pulled the cloth free. His reflection stared back. But something was wrong. The room behind the reflection was not the attic. It was the grove. The same white stones. The same gnarled tree. And in the reflection's background, just behind his shoulder, stood a boy. Evan. His eyes wide. Mouth slightly open. Silas spun around, but the attic was empty. When he looked back, the mirror only showed the attic once more. But now, carved faintly into the glass, just below eye level, were words. Come find me. Chapter 5, The Forgotten Map. Morning came in shades of amber and smoke. The first rays of sunlight spilled across the wooden floorboards like spilled honey, touching the edges of bookshelves, warming the weathered grains of wood, and glinting faintly off the frame of the mirror in the attic. But Silas had not returned to that room, not yet. Not after what he saw. He needed answers first. Answers buried not in dreams, but in memory. Downstairs, the house hummed gently with the sounds of morning boards creaking, wind slipping through half-open shutters, and the faint groan of old hinges settling back into place. Silas moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing a pot of tea with the dried rose leaf Myra had given him. The scent filled the air with a kind of soft sadness, earthy, floral, and hauntingly familiar. He poured the tea into a chipped ceramic mug, the same one his grandfather used to drink from, and stepped out onto the back porch. The world beyond the railing glistened with dew. The fields rolled gently into the distance, fringed by tall grass and spotted with wild flowers. A few birds flitted through the air, chasing invisible currents. The forest loomed beyond, silent and unmoving. A wall of green. A guardian. Or a gatekeeper. He took a long sip. The wooden knight was still in his coat pocket. He hadn't dared move it. Every time his fingers brushed against its carved surface, he felt a strange warmth. Not physical, something deeper. Like it recognized him. As he sat on the steps, a memory surfaced. He and Evan were sitting right here, on this same porch, one summer morning years ago. The smell of tea, the sound of bees in the garden, and Evan hunched over a parchment map, tongue poking out in concentration. "It's not a real map," Silas had said, peering over his brother's shoulder. "It will be," Evan replied, eyes shining. "When we follow it." "But you made it up." "Every place starts as made up," Evan had whispered, tapping his chest. "Until it's real in here." The words echoed now like a whisper through time. Silas stood, heart pounding, and went back inside. If that map was real, it had to be somewhere. He moved through the house with purpose. The tea forgotten on the railing, cooling in the sun. In the sitting room, he knelt beside the fireplace and opened the old storage chest beneath the window seat. Blankets. Books. A tin of rusted buttons. Then, beneath a false bottom, he found it. A leather folio tied with black string. He untied it with care, fingers shaking. Inside were drawings. Dozens of them maps, sketches of trees with markings, trails with runes, and compass roses drawn with obsessive detail. It was all Evan's handwriting. Every note in the margins, every strange symbol. And in the center, folded tightly and wrapped in parchment, was the map. The same one from the porch all those years ago. But now older, darker. Altered. New lines had been added. Circles around locations. Arrows pointing into the forest. And one place circled in red ink, nearly faded with time. The Hollow Gate. Silas stared at the name. He had never heard it before. And yet something about it felt known. Not remembered, but inherited. He took the map to the kitchen table and spread it out, tracing the routes. Some matched familiar trails: the bridge, the grove, the stream near the garden. But others twisted into the deeper woods, places he had never dared explore as a child. Beside the red circle was a note in Evan's script. Where the roots break stone, it's watching. But there's a way. The same words from the letter in the study. He was still staring at the map when a knock sounded at the front door. Sharp. Firm. He stood slowly and approached. When he opened it, Myra stood on the porch, cloak drawn tight around her. "Did I wake you?" she asked softly. "No," Silas replied. "Come in." She entered without hesitation, eyes scanning the room as if reacquainting herself with the bones of the house. "I remember this place," she murmured. "It always felt like a place that kept secrets." He led her to the kitchen and unrolled the map again. She studied it for a long moment, her brow furrowing. "I've seen these markings before," she whispered. "Where?" "Old books," she said. "On protective runes and barrier wards. And, in the forest. On the trees." "You've been out there?" "Not deep. But far enough to know something sleeps there." She traced her finger over the red circle. "This," she said, "is not a place for memories. This is a place for choosing." Silas looked at her. "Evan went there, didn't he?" She nodded slowly. "I think he was trying to stop something," she said. "Or speak to something. Either way, he crossed over. Past what's safe. Past what remembers your name." Silas rolled the map up and tied it carefully. "I need to find him." Myra looked at him for a long time. Then reached into her satchel and handed him a small charm, wooden, carved into a spiral, strung with red thread. "Wear it near the forest," she said. "It might not stop everything, but it might make them notice you less." "Them?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the window. The sun had climbed higher, casting a golden hue across the trees. "Go before dusk," she said. "Things move more freely after dark. Things that whisper." As she left, Silas stood alone again. The map in his hand. The night in his pocket. The charm around his neck. He looked toward the forest. Today, he would go deeper. Not for memory, but for answers. Chapter 6, The Hollow Gate. The wind had shifted by the time Silas stepped outside, carrying with it a faint scent of rain and something darker, something older. The map was rolled tightly in his coat pocket, the wooden knight still warm against his chest. The charm Myra gave him hung loosely around his neck, the red thread tangled with the coarse fabric of his shirt. The house behind him stood silent. It had watched him leave before countless times, but never like this. Now, it felt different. The same house, but now somehow part of something larger, older, and buried deeper than memory could reach. The road leading into the forest was quiet, as always. The trees stood like sentinels, their trunks tall and dark, their branches twisting above him in endless patterns. He had walked these paths as a child, following trails, and exploring the secrets the forest held, but today, he was no longer just a boy exploring. He was a man searching for something he couldn't quite name. Something that had always been there, just beneath the surface of his life. As he ventured further into the trees, the quiet grew more pronounced. The usual chorus of birds and rustling leaves was absent. Instead, there was only the whisper of wind, the occasional crack of a twig, and the steady beat of his own heart. His boots crunched over fallen leaves and twigs, his breath shallow and slow. The deeper he went, the more the air seemed to thicken, as if the forest itself was becoming aware of his presence. The trees began to change. The further he walked, the older they seemed. The trunks were gnarled, twisted into shapes that defied nature. Some were as thick as the width of the house, their bark slick with moss. The ground beneath his feet softened, and he stepped carefully over roots that jutted up like the fingers of a forgotten hand, reaching for him. And then, in a clearing up ahead, he saw it. The hollow gate. It wasn't a gate at all, not in the traditional sense. There were no iron bars, no ornate stone arch. Instead, the entrance to the space was defined by the trees themselves. They arced over the ground, their trunks bent inward, creating an unnatural archway that seemed to breathe with an almost sentient rhythm. The leaves above them were darker than any shade they should have been, and a faint, sickly green light seemed to emanate from deep within the arch, spilling onto the forest floor. Silas paused at the edge, staring at the portal. There was no sound, no movement. Just the feeling that something was waiting for him, deep within the hollow. He took a slow step forward. The moment his foot crossed the threshold of the arch, a cold wind swept over him. He flinched, pulling his coat tighter around him, but the air felt different now, sharp, like the bite of a knife. His breath caught as the scent of earth, decay, and something metallic flooded his senses. He stepped further, and the ground beneath him seemed to shift. The trees on either side creaked, and the earth groaned, as if the entire forest had exhaled a breath. And then, in the silence that followed, he heard it. A voice. Whispering. Silas. He froze. His pulse thundered in his ears, and his hands clenched into fists. The voice was deep, not quite human, neither male nor female, but something older, much older. The trees seemed to groan with the sound, their branches swaying, though there was no wind. Come, Find me. The words were soft, barely a murmur, but they seemed to carry across the clearing, brushing against his skin like an invisible hand. His heart raced. This wasn't the forest he remembered. This wasn't just a place of childhood games and lost memories. This was something else, something ancient, something alive. Silas moved cautiously, his eyes darting around. Every part of his being screamed to turn back, to leave this place and never return. But something deep within him, something that had been calling him for years, pulled him forward. He couldn't turn away now. Not when he was so close. The trees ahead of him parted, revealing a stone slab half buried in the dirt. He stepped toward it, reaching out to touch the smooth surface. As his fingers made contact with the stone, the ground trembled beneath him. "You shouldn't have come." The voice was louder now, more urgent. It came from everywhere beneath the ground, in the air, in his own mind. It rattled his thoughts, twisted his very sense of reality. His fingers traced the edges of the stone, and he noticed something etched into its surface. Ancient symbols, half worn by time, but still visible in the dim green light. They weren't just markings. They were warnings. Silas had seen them before on Evan's map, in the margins of pages, in the corners of forgotten books. But now, they seemed to burn into his memory. Where the roots meet the stone. The voice returned, this time softer, almost playful. "You came for him, didn't you?" "For Evan." "But what if I told you he isn't lost?" The words stung. Silas stepped back from the stone, his heart racing. The air grew colder, the green light flickering as if it were struggling to stay alight. The trees around him seemed to lean in closer, their shadows stretching like dark fingers. He could hear the soft whispering of the leaves, as if they were gossiping among themselves. "Come closer. You'll understand soon enough." The voice became more insistent, but Silas felt a surge of clarity. He wasn't ready to learn all of it, not yet. He hadn't come this far to be swept away by whatever force had been calling to him from the shadows. He turned and ran, not looking back. The clearing, the stone, the voice, everything behind him seemed to pulse with malevolent intent, but he couldn't afford to stay. Not yet. As he broke through the trees, the green light faded behind him. The woods returned to their normal state, silent, still, but now filled with a deeper sense of foreboding. He didn't stop running until the hollow gate was far behind him. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his chest ached. But he knew one thing for certain now. Evan hadn't just disappeared. He had been taken. The question was why? And where? Chapter 7, The Stone Beneath. Silas's feet hit the ground with a heavy thud, the rhythm of his running broken only by the occasional crack of a twig or rustle of leaves. The forest had closed in behind him, silent now, as if it had never spoken at all. But the words, the voice it lingered in his ears, in the back of his mind, gnawing at him, urging him forward, compelling him to return. He couldn't go back. Not now. Not yet. The hollow gate, that twisted archway of trees, still haunted him, its strange green light flickering in his memory. He had felt something there, something that wasn't quite human, something that lived between the cracks of time. And the stone. It had been ancient, buried deep in the earth, carved with symbols that felt like they were etched not just into rock, but into his very soul. His heart was still racing, but his thoughts were clear. Evan was still here. Not lost. Not dead. But trapped. Somewhere in the depths of this forest, in the heart of whatever ancient thing had been calling him all these years. He had to find him. He couldn't stop now. Silas stopped at the edge of the clearing, panting, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the path before him. The trees ahead of him were darker, their branches twisting like gnarled hands reaching out from the depths of the earth. He looked down at the map again, the ink faded but the path still clear. The symbols on the map seemed to align with the trees in front of him. One symbol in particular stood out, a spiral with a line running through it. It was at the center of the forest, just beyond the grove, and it was marked with a faint red ink. Where the stone breaks beneath the roots. He murmured, tracing the words with his finger. He knew what he had to do. He had come this far. No turning back. He pushed forward. The forest deepened as he walked, the shadows lengthening with each step. The path ahead was becoming harder to follow, the earth softer, the air thicker. The trees felt closer now, their branches brushing against his shoulders, their roots curling out of the ground like fingers trying to catch him. He felt the weight of the forest pressing down on him, the sense that someone was watching. But he kept walking. And then, just as the last light of the day slipped away, he saw it. The stone. It was enormous, jagged, and half buried beneath a tangle of roots and vines. The surface was smooth and dark, as if worn by centuries of rain, wind, and time. But what caught Silas's eye were the markings carved deep into the stone symbols that mirrored those on Evan's map. Some were familiar, the same runes he had seen in the margins of the map, but others were strange, twisted, like ancient words that no one had spoken for millennia. He knelt beside it, his fingers brushing over the carvings. As his hand made contact with the stone, a chill ran up his arm, and the air around him seemed to still, as though the world itself had paused. And then, the ground beneath him trembled. Silas stumbled back, his heart leaping into his throat. The stone groaned, shifting slightly, as though it were awakening. The vines and roots around it seemed to stir, curling, and twisting as if they had a life of their own. The air grew colder, heavier, and the faintest whisper echoed through the trees. "You found it?" The voice was clearer now, closer. Silas stood, his legs shaking, his hand instinctively reaching for the wooden knight in his pocket. He didn't know why, he just knew that it was the only thing keeping him grounded. The stone continued to tremble, its surface glowing faintly in the dim light. The markings on it began to shift, rearranging themselves like a puzzle coming together. The earth rumbled beneath him, and the air became thick with an unnatural energy. He took a step back, his heart racing. "You shouldn't have come," the voice was almost a hiss now, low and threatening. But Silas didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Not now. He stepped forward again, this time reaching out to touch the stone more deliberately, pressing his palm flat against its cool surface. The moment his skin made contact, the ground beneath him gave way. With a sudden lurch, the earth cracked open, the stone shifting downward, dragging the roots and the earth with it. Silas fell to his knees as the ground shook violently, and the stone sank deeper, taking the forest floor with it. He couldn't breathe. The air was thick, and the darkness seemed to close in around him, but he couldn't look away from the hole that was now widening before him. The stone disappeared into the earth, and the roots and vines shifted violently as if something massive was moving beneath. And then, silence. For a moment, Silas thought the world had stopped. But it hadn't. A faint glow began to rise from the dark hole, casting long shadows over the trees. It was not the green light of the hollow gate, but something darker, something ancient. It pulsed, as though alive. Something was down there. Something was waiting. He had to go. Silas took a deep breath, pulling himself to his feet. The earth still trembled beneath him, and the air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something that felt like the very pulse of the earth itself. His mind raced, his heart pounding, but he knew one thing for certain: Evan was down there. And whatever this thing was, whatever the stone had opened, it was not just part of the forest, it was part of something much larger. Something that had been waiting for him. He couldn't turn back now. With a final glance at the hole, Silas pulled the map from his pocket, studying it one last time. The path was clear. He had to descend into the heart of the forest, into the depths of the earth, where the roots met the stone. He didn't know what awaited him. But he knew one thing: he wasn't alone. Chapter 8, The Roots of Darkness. The descent was nothing like Silas had expected. When he had first touched the stone and felt the earth shift beneath him, he thought it was just the weight of the forest, the shifting of centuries-old roots. But as he stood at the edge of the widening hole, looking into the deep, dark abyss, he realized something far more ominous was at play. This wasn't just an opening in the ground, it was a gateway. A passage into something ancient. And something knew he was here. The pulsing light from below flickered like a distant heartbeat. It was faint, greenish, almost sickly. The air around him was thick with the smell of damp earth, moss, and something else, something metallic, faint but undeniably present. As he peered into the darkness, he saw its roots. Massive, tangled roots, stretching far down into the earth, their tips glowing faintly. The forest floor had begun to break apart, and beneath it, the very earth seemed to open, revealing an ancient, forgotten world. Silas stepped back, his breath shallow. His heart pounded in his chest, and every fiber of his being screamed to turn back. But he couldn't. Not now. Evan was down there. And no matter how dark, how dangerous, he couldn't leave him to whatever this was. He had to go. With a deep breath, Silas pulled himself together. He knew the way forward wouldn't be easy. The air around him felt thick, and every step he took seemed to echo louder than the last. The faint whispers returned, flickering in his mind. Words that weren't quite words, voices that weren't quite real. They surrounded him like a storm, urging him to listen, to understand, to follow. Come closer. Come closer. The voice was softer now, almost seductive, but Silas didn't stop. He had to find Evan. He crouched by the edge of the hole and reached into his coat, pulling out the wooden knight, Evan's last gift to him. It was warm in his hand, as if it had been waiting for this moment, for this journey. Silas didn't know why, but holding it steadied his mind. Silas took a deep breath and climbed down. The roots around him seemed to curl tighter, as though they were guiding him, or maybe trapping him. The air grew colder as he descended, and the light from above flickered until it was nothing more than a dim memory. His feet slid on the loose earth, and he had to brace himself against the growing pull of the tunnel. Every step down felt like a passage not just through the forest, but through time itself. The deeper he went, the older the forest seemed to become. The walls of the tunnel were slick with moss and slime, and every so often, he would pass remnants of long-buried objects, broken pottery, rusted tools, remnants of forgotten lives. And then he saw it. At the bottom of the hole, the roots spread out into an enormous cavern. The floor was uneven, littered with stones, some as large as boulders, others smaller, like the remnants of a broken foundation. In the center, a dark pool of water lay still, untouched by the light that flickered from the roots above. But it wasn't the water that caught his attention, it was the figure kneeling at its edge. Evan. Silas's breath caught in his throat as he saw his brother, his face pale, his eyes closed. He was kneeling by the pool, hands submerged in the dark water, his lips moving in a silent prayer or a chant. The air around him crackled with energy, and Silas could feel it, too, crawling along his skin, pulling him closer to the edge. His heart pounded as he stepped forward, calling out, "Evan! Evan!" But there was no response. The figure remained motionless, as if he hadn't heard. As Silas moved closer, his steps careful on the slick stone, he felt the weight of something much larger than the forest pressing in around him. The cavern seemed to shift. The roots above him pulsed with strange energy, their glow flickering, casting eerie shadows against the walls. The water in the pool rippled, the surface disturbed by something unseen, something below the surface. The ground trembled, and the whispers grew louder, surrounding him. "It's not too late to leave," a voice hissed, its tone colder than ice. "Turn back. You don't understand what you're doing." Silas froze, his breath catching in his throat. The voice was different now, no longer playful or distant, but full of warning, full of threat. And then, Evan's voice broke the silence. "It's not too late," Evan said, his eyes still closed, his voice distant. "But you must understand. This is the only way." Silas's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "Evan, But Evan's eyes remained closed. His hands tightened in the water as if he were holding something far more ancient, far more dangerous than Silas could understand. "The roots, Silas," Evan said quietly. "They called to me. They knew I would come. They knew I would listen." He paused, his voice shaking slightly. "I never meant for this to happen, but I had no choice." Silas took another step forward, but before he could speak, the ground shook beneath him. The pool rippled violently, and the roots above them trembled. The entire cavern seemed to pulse with life, a force not quite natural, not quite human. And then, with a terrible crack, the stone beneath Silas's feet split open. A flash of white light erupted from the ground. Silas stumbled back, instinctively reaching for Evan, but the light enveloped him, wrapping around him like tendrils of flame. "Silas." The voice was everywhere now, all around him, 1,000 voices, 1,000 whispers. "Come closer. We are waiting." The world tilted. The roots in the cavern seemed to come alive, reaching, curling, as if they were alive. They pulsed with a rhythm slow, steady, like a heartbeat, the forest's pulse. And with each heartbeat, Silas felt the grip of the forest tighten. He reached for Evan, but as his fingers brushed against his brother's shoulder, the light flared one last time, blinding him. And then, silence. Chapter 9, The Hollow Truth. The world spun back into focus. Silas's vision blurred at first, his body disoriented, his mind racing to catch up. The light, the blinding white that had enveloped him, slowly began to fade, leaving behind only the sharp, acrid smell of burnt earth. His breath came in ragged gasps as his eyes fluttered open, but everything around him was still a haze. He was lying on the ground, his back pressed against something hard, cold, and alive. The ground beneath him shifted, undulating like a living thing. He pushed himself up, his fingers digging into the earth, and looked around. He was no longer in the cavern, no longer in the forest. He was in a place that defied understanding. The trees here were twisted, their trunks thick with knots that pulsed like veins, stretching high into a sky thick with dark clouds. The air was heavy, charged with a static that made his skin tingle, like the calm before a storm. The landscape around him shifted like liquid, the ground itself breathing, alive, in a way that Silas couldn't quite comprehend. In the distance, he saw it, the hollow gate. It was no longer just a portal between the forest and the world. It was something more. The trees bent toward it, their branches outstretched like fingers reaching for something just beyond their grasp. "Evan!" Silas shouted, his voice echoing off the shifting landscape, but there was no answer. Just the sound of the wind whispering through the distorted trees. He pushed forward, stumbling, the roots around him writhing like serpents, the ground groaning beneath his weight. Every step felt as though it was dragging him deeper into the earth, into something far darker than he had ever imagined. And then, he heard it. A voice. His brother's voice. "Silas." It came from everywhere, echoing through the distorted air. "You've come too far." Silas's heart clenched, his feet moving faster now, driven by a force he couldn't resist. "Evan!" He shouted again, this time more forcefully. "Where are you?" The landscape around him warped, shifting as if the world itself were trying to deny him his path. The trees whispered, the ground trembled, and the very air seemed to close in on him. "It's too late to turn back," the voice replied. "You should have listened to the warnings." The words rang in his ears, and a chill ran down his spine. There was something wrong, something had happened to Evan. He wasn't just lost in the forest. He had become part of it. Part of something older, something deeper. He pushed forward, despite the growing sense of dread. The hollow gate loomed ahead, now more twisted, more insidious than before. The trees around it were bent in unnatural angles, their branches reaching out like claws. The air felt heavier the closer he got, the static building with every step. He reached the gate, his hand outstretched, but before he could touch it, a force slammed into him. He was thrown backward, landing hard on the ground. He gasped, pain shooting through his chest, but before he could rise, the world around him darkened. "You shouldn't be here, Silas." The voice again. But this time, it was not Evan's. It was something older, deeper. The voice of the forest, the voice of something that had existed long before he ever arrived. "This place is not for you. Not for your kind. Not for the living." Silas's heart pounded as he struggled to his feet, his eyes searching the darkness. The trees twisted, their branches swaying like a vast, reaching sea of roots and shadows. And there, standing at the threshold of the hollow gate, was Evan. But he wasn't the same. Evan's once bright eyes were hollow, black as the void, his skin pale, almost translucent, as if he had been drained of everything that made him human. His body was surrounded by an eerie glow, the same sickly green light that had emanated from the gate. "Evan!" Silas whispered, his voice trembling. Evan's head tilted, his lips curling into a faint, twisted smile. "I never wanted this, Silas," he said, his voice distant, as if coming from somewhere deep beneath the earth. "But I had no choice. The forest, it called to me. It showed me things. Things I couldn't ignore." Silas's heart sank as he looked at his brother, now nothing more than a shadow of the person he once knew. What happened to you? Evan took a slow step forward, his eyes locked on Silas. You didn't listen. You should have stayed away. But now you've come, and there's no going back. The air around them thickened, the roots beneath them beginning to twist and crack. The ground trembled as if the very earth was waking up, and the gate behind Evan pulsed with power, sending waves of energy rippling through the landscape. What are you doing, Evan? Silas cried, his voice breaking. What is this place? Evan's lips parted, but before he could answer, the ground beneath them split open. The trees shrieked, their branches snapping like broken bones as the earth cracked wide, revealing a chasm that stretched deep into the heart of the forest. From the depths of the chasm, a dark shape began to rise, a massive figure, towering and twisted, its form barely recognizable as anything human. This is where it begins, Evan whispered. Where it always begins. And where it will end. The figure loomed larger, its eyes glowing with an ancient, malevolent light. The ground shook with its every movement, and the air was filled with the deafening sound of roots cracking and splintering. Silas's legs trembled as he took a step back, fear clawing at his chest. He knew, deep down, that Evan was no longer the person he had been. He was a part of this place now. A part of the forest. And the forest was alive. The hollow gate had opened. And Silas had walked straight into its trap. You shouldn't have come, Silas, the voice whispered again, its tone mocking, satisfied. But now, it's too late. And the figure in the chasm roared, its voice shaking the very ground beneath them. Chapter 10, The Heart of the Forest. The earth trembled beneath Silas's feet as the figure from the chasm loomed closer, its massive shape filling the space with an oppressive, suffocating energy. The air was thick with the stench of decay and rot, and the ground beneath them felt as if it were alive, undulating and shifting, its pulse resonating in Silas's very bones. The figure, no, the creature was not entirely human. Its limbs were gnarled and twisted, its skin slick and shadowed, as if made of the very earth itself. Vines and roots wrapped around its body like armor, and its eyes glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. It was a being of ancient power, a force that had slumbered beneath the forest for centuries, waiting for this moment. And now, that moment had arrived. Evan, Silas whispered, his voice hoarse with fear and disbelief. What have you become? Evan, standing in the midst of the chaos, his once human form now a hollow shell, turned slowly toward his brother. His eyes were black as the void, empty and devoid of emotion. I never wanted this, he said, his voice distant and hollow, as if it came from a place far beyond their world. But I had no choice. The forest chose me. And now, it chooses you. Silas's heart ached at the sight of his brother, but there was no time to dwell on the past. The creature before them, this ancient, twisted force, was closing in. It was like a storm, and everything in its path was consumed by its fury. The roots of the trees, the very ground beneath them, began to writhe, bending toward the chasm where the creature had risen. The air hummed with dark energy, and Silas could feel the pull, the oppressive weight of it all. "The forest is waking," Evan's voice echoed in his mind, a whisper that sent chills down his spine. "And so am I. But you must understand. We are all part of it. Every root, every branch, every leaf, it's all connected. It has always been this way." Silas shook his head, his mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of what Evan was saying. "No. This can't be true. We're not a part of the forest. We're human. You don't get it, do you?" Evan's voice took on a bitter edge. "We are all born from the earth, Silas. The forest gives us life, and it takes it away. It is both creation and destruction. It's part of us, whether we choose to accept it or not. I've seen it. I've felt it. The forest, it speaks to me." Silas took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Evan, listen to me. This isn't you. You're not just some servant of the forest. You're my brother. You've always been." But Evan only shook his head, his eyes cold and empty. "I have no brother. Not anymore. This is who I am now. This is who we all are. The forest doesn't forget. And it never lets go." The creature behind him, a dark, monstrous force of nature, stirred again. It opened its mouth, and a deep, guttural sound filled the air. It was not a roar, but a hum, a low, resonating vibration that seemed to shake the ground beneath Silas's feet. Silas stumbled backward, his heart racing. The force of the sound was overwhelming, and the roots in the ground began to surge around him, reaching for his legs, wrapping around his ankles like shackles. He gasped and tried to pull free, but the roots tightened, pulling him deeper into the earth. "Hell!" Silas shouted, struggling against the roots. "Evan! Please, you have to help me." But Evan didn't move. His expression was blank, emotionless. He was no longer the brother Silas had known. He had become a part of this dark force, a puppet of the forest's will. The roots began to crawl up Silas's legs, wrapping around him like serpents, pulling him toward the chasm. He could feel the earth beneath him shifting, and the air around him thickened with the oppressive force of the creature that loomed above. "You have to stop!" Silas cried out, his voice desperate. "This isn't you. This isn't who we are." But Evan's eyes remained hollow. "It is who I am now." The roots tightened around Silas, dragging him toward the edge of the chasm. He could feel the ground beneath him cracking, the earth giving way to the void below. The creature's roar filled the air, drowning out his thoughts, his pleas. Everything was closing in on him. And then, a spark. A flicker of light. Silas's heart skipped a beat as the wooden knight in his pocket suddenly grew warm. He pulled it out, his fingers trembling as he gazed at the tiny, carved figure. The knight glowed faintly, pulsing with an energy that felt alive. It was then that he realized. The knight wasn't just a toy. It was a symbol. A key. Evan. Silas shouted, holding the knight high, the light from it flashing in the darkness. This is what you left behind. This is what you need. For the first time, Evan's eyes flickered with something faint, like a spark of recognition. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the cold emptiness that had taken hold of him. The roots continued to drag Silas down, but he wouldn't give up. Not now. He couldn't. Evan. Silas cried again, his voice shaking with determination. This is who we were. This is who we are. Don't forget. The roots halted. The creature paused. The air grew still, and Silas felt the pressure around him lessen, if only for a moment. And then, something changed. The ground trembled once more, but it was different. The roots began to pull back, retreating into the earth. The chasm's grip loosened, and Silas's feet hit solid ground again. For a brief moment, everything was silent. Evan's eyes slowly flickered. His hand twitched. I remember, he whispered, barely audible. But the moment passed. Chapter 11, The Roots Awaken. The moment Evan's eyes flickered with recognition, Silas's heart leapt, but it was only for a second. The darkness that had claimed Evan's soul, that had swallowed him whole, was far from gone. And as Silas stood there, holding the wooden knight aloft, he realized that this was the moment of choice. The moment he would either save his brother or lose him forever. The forest was silent now, the oppressive weight of the creature's presence hovering just beneath the surface. The roots, once tied around Silas's legs, had begun to retreat. But they were not gone. They were waiting. Watching. Every movement he made, every breath he took, the forest seemed to respond in kind, like a living entity that was both watching and judging. Silas reached out for Evan, his voice trembling. Evan, come back to me. This is not who you are. This isn't you. But Evan didn't move. His body was still, frozen in the same unnatural posture, his eyes vacant. I don't know how to come back, Silas. Evan's voice was hollow, distant. The forest, it won't let me go. Silas's breath caught in his throat as the reality of what Evan had become sank in. This wasn't just a brother lost in the woods. This wasn't just a man corrupted by the forest. Evan had become part of it. He was as entwined with the roots as the very trees themselves. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath them trembled again. Silas could feel it now, the pull of the forest, drawing him in, wrapping around him like a suffocating embrace. The creature, the presence in the chasm, was still there, its power hanging over them like a storm cloud, waiting to unleash its fury. "You can't save me, Silas." Evan's voice cracked, his gaze distant. "This is the way it's always been. The forest chooses. It always has." The words twisted like daggers in Silas's heart. His brother was lost but not yet gone. There was still a chance to pull him back, but the cost was unknown. The forest was ancient, its roots dug deep into the very fabric of time itself. And now, it had claimed Evan as its own. But Silas wasn't ready to give up. He took a step forward, ignoring the searing pain in his legs as the roots around him twisted tighter. "I won't leave you, Evan. I promised." Evan's eyes flickered again, a shadow of the brother Silas once knew shining through the emptiness. "You shouldn't have come back. The forest remembers everything, Silas. It remembers all the mistakes, all the darkness we've tried to forget." Silas could feel the ground beneath him giving way, the forest urging him to give in, to accept the power of the roots, to become part of its eternal cycle. The temptation was powerful, a whispering call that tugged at his very soul. But he knew better. He had come this far, and he wouldn't turn back now. "The forest might remember everything," Silas said, his voice firm, "but we're more than the darkness. We're more than the roots that try to control us. You're my brother, and I'm not leaving without you." The words rang out into the silence of the forest, and for a moment, the trees seemed to still, as if holding their breath. The roots around Silas's legs loosened, but only slightly. The creature in the chasm let out a low growl, a sound that reverberated through the very air. "You cannot fight what you don't understand," Evan whispered, his voice breaking. "The forest is not just a place. It's a living, breathing entity. It is the heart of all things. It sees all. It knows all. And it has chosen." The air around Silas began to swirl, the wind picking up, the earth beneath him shifting as if it were alive. The very roots of the trees seemed to reach out, wrapping around him, pulling him closer to the chasm. The forest had awoken, and it was angry. Silas's fingers tightened around the wooden knight, and suddenly, he understood. This wasn't just a toy. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a key. A key to the heart of the forest. A key to understanding what had happened to Evan and what the forest had become. He raised the knight high above his head, the wood glowing faintly in the dim light. The roots, the creature, the forest itself seemed to pause. The air crackled with energy as the night's glow grew brighter, pulsing with a steady rhythm. The earth around them seemed to breathe in time with the night's pulse. "This is our choice, Evan," Silas said, his voice steady. "We don't have to become part of the forest. We can fight back. We can leave." Evan's eyes flickered again, his expression torn. "But the forest won't let us," he whispered. "It doesn't control us," Silas said firmly. "You're stronger than this. We're stronger than this." The moment Silas finished speaking, the roots that had been reaching for him suddenly recoiled, as if repelled by the power of the night. The creature in the chasm let out a roar, but it was drowned out by the light from the night, which now blazed with a brilliant intensity. "You're wrong," Evan cried out, his body writhing as if something was trying to pull him back into the depths of the forest. "You don't understand. You never understood. The forest is us. It's everything. And we cannot escape it." The ground trembled violently, but Silas held his ground. "We can. And we will." With a final, determined effort, Silas plunged the knight into the earth before him, its tip sinking into the roots that had reached out to claim him. The moment it made contact, a shock wave of energy rippled through the forest, and the roots began to pull back, retreating into the earth. The ground cracked and groaned, and the creature in the chasm roared once more, but now it was a cry of pain, not triumph. The forest shuddered, as if it were waking up from a long, dark sleep. The roots retreated, the trees straightened, and the ground stopped trembling. The light from the night faded, leaving only the faintest glow in the air. Silas's breath caught in his throat as he looked at Evan. The darkness in his eyes had lessened, but it was still there, a flicker of something ancient and unstoppable. "You can still come back, Evan," Silas whispered, his heart aching. "We can fix this. Together." But Evan's gaze remained distant. "It's too late," he said softly. "The forest, it's too strong. It's not just in me anymore. It's in all of us." And then, with one final, lingering glance, Evan stepped backward, disappearing into the shadows of the forest, leaving Silas alone once more. The forest had awoken, and with it, the truth had been revealed. The forest wasn't just a place, it was a force. A force that had always been there, watching, waiting. And Silas knew that he was now part of its story. Chapter 12, The Final Choice. The forest was silent, but not in the way it had been before. The oppressive stillness weighed on Silas's shoulders like an invisible cloak, a constant reminder of the decision he now had to make. His breath came in shallow bursts, his heart racing with every thought that swirled in his mind. The encounter with Evan had left him shaken, but it had also ignited something inside him, a flicker of hope, no matter how faint. But that hope was slipping away. He stood in the heart of the forest now, the hollow gate still looming in the distance, a dark reminder of the power it held. The trees around him seemed to shift, the roots stretching like fingers beneath the earth, and the air was thick with the weight of something ancient, something that had been waiting for centuries. Evan had disappeared into the shadows, his form swallowed by the forest, his last words still echoing in Silas's ears. "It's too late." Those words haunted him, gnawed at him. But Silas couldn't afford to believe them. Not yet. Not when there was still a chance to save his brother, to stop the forest's dark influence from claiming him entirely. Silas took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of earth and moss. He could feel the pull of the forest, the subtle, insistent whisper of its ancient power urging him forward, deeper into its heart. Every step he took seemed to lead him closer to the truth, and yet, with each step, he felt the weight of the decision he was facing. The knife he had held in his hand earlier still burned with a faint, steady warmth. It had been a symbol of their childhood, a connection to the past. But now, it was more than that. It was the key, the only thing that could stand between him and the forest's power. "I can't do this alone," Silas whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rustling leaves. He closed his eyes, remembering the words of Myra, the old woman who had warned him of the forest's pull. "The forest is alive, Silas. It remembers everything. And once you're in, it doesn't let go. It will take you, piece by piece, until there's nothing left." The memory of her words seemed to reach him now, as if the forest itself was warning him. But Silas couldn't stop. He couldn't turn back. Not when Evan was still out there, lost, and when there was still a chance to save him. He moved forward, his steps slow but steady. The forest seemed to part before him, the trees bending out of his way, their branches brushing against his arms like the hands of ghosts. The path was winding, dark, and treacherous, but Silas pressed on. And then, he saw it. In the distance, barely visible through the thick mist, was a clearing. A light dim, flickering spilled from the center, casting long shadows across the ground. It was a soft, eerie glow, like the embers of a fire that hadn't quite died. And in the center of the clearing, standing alone, was a stone altar. Silas's heart skipped a beat as he approached, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. The altar was ancient, its surface covered in moss and ivy, the carvings on its sides worn with age. But it wasn't just the altar that caught his attention, it was what lay on it. A figure. Evan. His brother lay motionless on the stone, his body pale, his eyes closed. The eerie glow surrounded him like a cocoon, and the air around the altar hummed with energy. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Silas stepped closer. "Evan," Silas whispered, his voice trembling. His heart ached as he looked at his brother, still and lifeless. But the moment he spoke, the air around him seemed to shift. Evan's eyes flickered open. But they weren't the same eyes Silas had known. They were dark, empty. The blackness seemed to swirl within them, like an abyss that threatened to swallow everything in its path. "Silas," Evan's voice was a low whisper, filled with an eerie calm. "You shouldn't have come." Silas knelt beside the altar, his heart pounding in his chest. "Evan, you have to wake up. You have to fight this. We can still escape." But Evan's smile was hollow, his face twisted with something darker. "Escape?" he echoed, his voice cold. There is no escape. Not for us. Not for anyone who enters the forest's heart. Silas reached out, his hand trembling as he brushed his fingers against Evan's cold skin. I don't care. I'm not leaving you here. Evan's eyes darkened, and for a moment, the air around them seemed to pulse with energy, like the forest itself was reacting to Silas's words. The ground beneath him trembled, and the stone altar groaned as if alive. You don't understand, Evan said, his voice more forceful now. The forest is not just a place. It is a living, breathing entity. It feeds on those who enter. It is a part of us. And it has chosen. Silas's heart sank as he realized what Evan meant. The forest hadn't just claimed Evan. It had consumed him, made him part of its dark will. And now, the forest was reaching for Silas, its roots and branches stretching toward him, its tendrils winding through the air. No. Silas shouted, standing up. He backed away from the altar, his eyes searching for a way out. I won't let it take you, Evan. You're my brother, and I won't give up on you. The roots recoiled, the air thickening with tension. The forest seemed to close in around them, the ground cracking and shifting. But Evan only stared at him, his eyes filled with sorrow. You don't have a choice, Evan whispered, his voice echoing through the clearing. You've already made it. The forest has already chosen. Silas stood frozen, the weight of his brother's words crushing him. The forest was not just an ancient force, it was alive, sentient, and it had claimed them both. The knight in his pocket burned with an unfamiliar heat. Suddenly, the ground shifted violently beneath him. Silas stumbled, his feet slipping on the damp earth, and he was thrown forward. As he fell, his hand landed on the stone altar. The knight in his pocket slid free, landing on the altar beside Evan. And in that moment, the forest roared. Now, it is complete. Chapter 13, The Last Stand. The moment the knight touched the altar beside Evan, the world exploded. It wasn't a flash of light, nor a deafening roar. It was a ripple, a pulse, like the beat of a heart. The air thickened, and the ground trembled beneath Silas's feet. The world around him blurred, as if reality itself were bending, twisting in ways it was never meant to. The night, the symbol of their childhood, now glowed with an eerie blue light. It pulsed in time with the energy around them, as if it were drawing the forest's power into itself, feeding off it, fighting it. Silas stood frozen, his hand gripping the stone altar. He felt the pull of the forest stronger now than ever before, as if the roots of the trees themselves were reaching for him, wanting to drag him into the earth. His legs trembled beneath him, the weight of the forest's power pressing down on his chest. This is the end, Silas, Evan's voice echoed, hollow and distant. His form remained motionless on the altar, his body now part of the forest, part of the dark force that had claimed him. You can't stop it. You can't stop what has already been set in motion. The roots around them stirred again, their dark tendrils crawling through the ground, seeking to entangle Silas. The forest was awakening, and it was angry. But Silas wasn't backing down. He couldn't. "You're wrong, Evan," Silas said through gritted teeth, his voice trembling with determination. "I won't let this be the end. I won't let it take you." He felt the warmth of the night in his hand, the energy from it coursing through his veins. For the first time since he had entered the forest, he felt a spark of power, a connection to something greater than himself. The forest had claimed Evan, but Silas still had the power to fight back. He wasn't powerless. He was more than this. More than a victim to the forest's will. "You can't fight the forest," Evan whispered, his voice breaking. "It's too old, too powerful. It's a part of everything." "No," Silas shouted, his voice echoing through the clearing. "It's not. It's just a forest, just roots and trees. And you're my brother." He raised the night high, the light from it intensifying, as if responding to his words. The air crackled with energy, and the roots that had once moved to entangle him pulled back, recoiling as if burned. The ground beneath him rumbled, and the very trees seemed to groan with the force of the battle being waged. Evan's eyes flickered, just for a moment, a spark of recognition. "Silas, you don't understand," he said, his voice softer now. "This isn't just about us. It's about everything. The forest is alive. It has always been alive. And it's choosing who lives, who dies, who becomes part of it." Silas's heart ached at the pain in his brother's voice. He could see the struggle in Evan's eyes, the conflict between the brother he had known and the force that had consumed him. But Silas knew that Evan was still there, somewhere deep inside, buried beneath the forest's grip. And Silas wasn't about to lose him, not now. "You're wrong, Evan," Silas said, his voice firm. "The forest doesn't control us. We control our own fate. We always have. And I'm not giving up on you. Not now. Not ever." The night in his hand blazed brighter, its glow casting long shadows across the clearing. The roots that had once threatened to pull him under now seemed to recoil, as if they were afraid of the power that was rising in Silas. The forest began to tremble. A deep, resonating sound filled the air, a growl, a roar, the very heart of the forest coming alive in response to Silas's defiance. The roots snapped and cracked, the trees groaning as if in agony. The earth beneath them quaked, and the sky above darkened with storm clouds. It was as if the very world was collapsing in on itself. "You don't know what you're doing," Evan said, his voice full of sorrow. "You can't stop this. It's too late." "No," Silas whispered, tears stinging his eyes. "It's not too late. We're stronger than this. You and me, Evan, we're stronger than the forest. We always have been. With that, Silas plunged the knight into the ground before him, driving it deep into the roots of the forest. The moment it made contact, a shock wave of energy exploded from the knight, sending a wave of light crashing through the clearing. The roots recoiled, the trees groaning as if in pain. The force was overwhelming, a torrent of power that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the forest. Silas was thrown back, his body slamming into the ground as the light from the night burned bright. The roar of the forest grew louder, but it was a cry of agony, not triumph. "No more," Silas whispered, his body shaking as the energy from the night pulsed through him. "No more will we be controlled. No more will we be consumed." And then, silence. For a moment, everything was still. The forest, the ground, the trees, the very air itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, slowly, the roots began to retract, pulling back into the earth. The ground stopped trembling, and the energy that had once consumed the clearing began to fade. The dark clouds overhead began to dissipate, and the forest, once dark and twisted, now seemed to breathe again. Evan was still kneeling on the altar, but his eyes were no longer empty. There was a flicker of life in them, just a spark, but it was enough. "Silas," Evan whispered, his voice hoarse. "You did it?" Silas reached out, his hand trembling as he touched his brother's shoulder. "I never gave up on you, Evan." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Evan looked up at him, his eyes clear, his expression human. I don't know how to thank you," Evan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted to become this thing. But I couldn't stop it." Silas smiled, his heart swelling with relief. "You don't have to thank me. You're my brother. And we're in this together. Always." The forest around them seemed to breathe again, the roots retreating into the earth, the trees straightening. The oppressive weight that had hung over them for so long lifted, and the clearing was bathed in a soft, golden light. It wasn't over. Not yet. There were still questions to be answered, still dangers to face. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Silas knew one thing for certain. They had won. And the forest would never claim them again. Chapter 14, The Way Forward. The forest, once a prison of roots and shadows, now stood in quiet submission. The ancient trees, their twisted limbs and gnarled trunks, no longer seemed threatening. They were still, their branches reaching high into the now clear sky, as if seeking redemption for the dark power they had once harbored. Silas stood in the center of the clearing, his hands still trembling from the force of the battle that had just taken place. The knight in his hand was no longer glowing, its power spent, but it still felt warm. He clenched it tightly, as if drawing strength from the symbol that had guided him through the darkest moments of his life. Beside him, Evan was standing, though it was clear he was still recovering from the grip the forest had held over him. His eyes were no longer empty, they were filled with confusion, pain, and most importantly awareness. The darkness that had clouded his mind seemed to have lifted, but the weight of what he had become still hung over him like a shadow. Silas turned to face him, his heart aching at the sight of his brother, not as the man he had known, but as someone who had been lost, consumed by the forest's power. "Evan," Silas began, his voice soft. "I don't know what happened. I don't know how you got lost in all of this, but I do know one thing." Evan looked up at him, his expression unreadable. "I don't either, Silas. I was consumed by it. The forest. It whispers to you. It shows you things you can't unsee. Things that make you forget who you are." Silas took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "But you are Evan. You can come back. We've fought this together. And we'll rebuild, together." The words were simple, but the weight of them hung in the air. Evan had seen the very core of the forest, the darkness that had shaped it for centuries. And now, Silas wasn't sure how to help him heal from the scars that ran deep. But they had survived. And that, at least, was a start. For a moment, there was silence between them, the only sound the rustling of the leaves in the wind. But then, Evan spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I remember, the roots," Evan said slowly, his eyes distant, as if recalling a dream. "They're not just part of the forest. They are the forest. They're what connects everything: life, death, time, memory. It's all tangled in there." Silas listened, his heart heavy. He had never known the full extent of the forest's power, never understood just how far it reached, how deeply it was embedded in everything around them. "Do you think the forest can ever be free?" Silas asked, his voice quiet. "Free from what it's become?" Evan turned toward him, his eyes still clouded with the remnants of the dark force that had held him captive. "I don't know," he said. "The forest has always been here. It has its own will, its own life. But I think it was never meant to consume us. It was supposed to protect us." There was a flicker of something in Evan's eyes then, a glimmer of hope, though faint. But Silas could see it, and it was enough to know that his brother hadn't given up entirely. The wind picked up, swirling around them. It wasn't cold, but it carried a sense of change, of new beginnings. The forest around them seemed to be breathing, alive again, but not with the same oppressive force it had held before. "We can make this right," Silas said, his voice stronger now, filled with resolve. "We've fought for this. For each other. For the world we used to know. And we're not going to stop now." Evan nodded, though it was a slow, hesitant movement. He wasn't sure of the way forward, but he was willing to try. He had to try. For the first time in what felt like forever, the forest felt different. The energy that had once been so thick with malice now seemed lighter, as if the very air was clearing. Silas turned toward the path leading deeper into the forest, the path they had walked so many times before, but now it seemed unfamiliar, uncertain. The way forward was unknown, and the future felt wide open, full of possibilities and dangers alike. He looked back at Evan. "Are you ready?" Evan looked at him, a trace of fear still in his eyes, but there was something else, too. Something that hadn't been there before. It was a glimmer of hope, the first spark of something that might become light again. "I'm ready," Evan said softly. Together, they began to walk. The forest was still. The air was thick with possibility. But it was not the same forest anymore. Chapter 15, The Rebirth. The forest had changed, but it was still the same. Silas walked through the woods with Evan at his side, feeling the difference in the air, the light, the very heartbeat of the land. The oppressive weight that had once hovered over them was gone, replaced by something lighter, something full of potential. It was as if the forest had been given a second chance, a chance to breathe, to heal, just as they had. But Silas knew that healing would take time. The roots still ran deep, the memory of darkness still lingered beneath the surface. And there were things in the forest that neither he nor Evan fully understood. It wasn't over. Not yet. Evan moved beside him, his eyes still haunted by the things he had seen, the things he had done. But there was a strength in him now, a spark of humanity that had been dimmed but not extinguished. They were both still scarred, still broken in ways they couldn't quite express. But together, they would find a way forward. "Do you think it's over?" Evan asked quietly, his voice carrying the weight of uncertainty. His hand brushed against a tree, the bark warm under his fingers, but there was still a sense of hesitation in his touch. Silas glanced at him. The forest around him was beautiful, bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun, but Evan's question carried a truth that couldn't be ignored. "No," Silas said. "I don't think it's ever truly over. Not with the forest. Not with what it has become." Evan looked at him, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Silas paused, taking in the view of the trees stretching out before them, the sky above them vast and open. It was the same path they had walked so many years ago, but it felt different now, like they were stepping into a new world, a world that was still being forged by their choices. "The forest is part of us, Evan," Silas said. "It's a part of everything. You've felt it, I know you have. It doesn't just go away. It lives within the land, within the roots. We've only just begun to understand its power." "But we stopped it," Evan protested. "We broke the connection. The night, the altar, the forest. It's different now." Silas nodded. "It's different, yes. But that doesn't mean it's finished. We've only severed part of the connection. There's more to this forest than we know. More to the roots, to the power that lies beneath." Evan looked at him, the weight of his words settling in. What are we supposed to do, then? What's the point of all this if it's just going to keep coming back? Silas took a deep breath. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew they couldn't let the fear of the unknown control them. We rebuild, Evan. We live. We find a way to coexist with the forest, not as enemies, but as part of it. We've learned too much to walk away from it now. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of understanding, the kind that came when you both knew something deep in your soul but weren't yet ready to put it into words. The forest around them seemed to listen, its rustling leaves and shifting branches the only sounds. The trees had grown quieter now, the once oppressive hum of the roots softened to a gentle murmur. And then, from the distance, came a sound. A faint crackling, like fire. Silas stopped, his hand instinctively reaching for the wooden knight still hanging at his side. The energy in the air shifted again, something dark creeping back into the atmosphere. He exchanged a glance with Evan. "Do you feel that?" Silas asked, his voice low. Evan nodded, his expression tense. "It's the forest," he said. "It's not done yet." Silas's heart pounded in his chest as the crackling grew louder, closer. The air grew warmer, and the ground beneath them seemed to hum with an energy that sent shivers down his spine. Without a word, they moved forward, the path ahead twisting and turning as the forest seemed to pull them deeper. The trees around them leaned in closer, their branches interlacing, creating a canopy that blocked out the sky. The crackling grew louder, and then they saw it. In the center of the clearing ahead, a fire burned bright, alive, and crackling with an unnatural intensity. It wasn't a normal fire. It was blue, swirling with tendrils of green and black, as if the fire itself were alive. It twisted and danced in the air, casting long, eerie shadows across the ground. And standing in the middle of the fire was a figure. A figure that looked almost like Evan, but not quite. The figure was draped in robes of dark green, the fabric shifting like leaves in the wind. Its face was obscured by a hood, but there was no mistaking the aura of power that surrounded it. The figure turned, and Silas felt a cold chill run through him. The forest seemed to hold its breath. "The forest never truly dies, Silas," the figure's voice echoed, deep and resonant. "You cannot destroy what has always been. The roots run deep, and they will always find a way to grow again." Evan stepped forward, his hand clenched at his side. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice thick with both fear and anger. "What do you want?" The figure's head tilted, and a low laugh echoed from beneath the hood. "I am the forest's will, its guardian. And I've come to remind you of your place." The ground trembled again, the roots beneath them stirring, twisting in response to the figure's words. Silas could feel the power building, the weight of the forest pressing down on him once more. You think you've won, the figure continued, its voice a low growl. But the forest will never be tamed. It will never be controlled. It is eternal. And it will consume all who try to bend it to their will. Evan took another step forward, his eyes burning with determination. We won't let it take us again, he said, his voice steady, unwavering. We will stop it. Whatever it takes. The figure's laugh echoed again, and for a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. You cannot stop what you do not understand, the figure said, its voice growing louder, more menacing. The forest is more than just a place. It is a living, breathing force. And it will never let go. Silas stood firm, his hand tightening around the wooden knight. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain, the battle wasn't over. The forest still held secrets, still had power that neither he nor Evan fully understood. But together, they would fight. And together, they would stand against the forest's will. Chapter 16, The Final Confrontation. The air was thick with an unnatural heat, the flames burning hotter than any fire should have. Silas felt the weight of the forest pressing in on him again, as if the very earth beneath his feet was alive, watching, waiting. His heart hammered in his chest, and every instinct screamed to run, to escape the presence that loomed before him. But there was no turning back now. The figure in front of them stood tall, draped in robes of shifting green that seemed to blend into the forest around it, the shadows of the trees moving like living creatures beneath the cloak. Its face was obscured by a hood, but Silas could feel the power radiating from it, ancient, dangerous, and dark. The ground trembled beneath their feet, the roots of the trees writhing like serpents, and the fire crackled with an otherworldly intensity. You still don't understand, the figure's voice rumbled, deep and resonant, like the forest itself speaking through it. You've meddled in things far beyond your comprehension. The forest chose me to guard it, to protect it. And now you've come, trying to destroy what you can never control. Silas stood firm, his heart steadying as he reached for the wooden knight hanging at his side. The familiar warmth of the knight in his palm grounded him, reminding him of everything he had fought for. He looked at Evan, whose eyes were filled with a mixture of confusion and determination. We've already been through this, Silas said, his voice cutting through the figure's dark words. The forest doesn't control us. It's just a place, a part of nature. We won't let it consume us again. The figure's laugh was low, cruel, and it sent a chill through Silas's bones. You think you can fight it? The forest is eternal. It is the beginning and the end. And it will always rise again. I am its will, and you. The figure's hand rose slowly, as if to command the very roots of the earth. We'll never be free of it. Evan stepped forward, his expression hardening as he glared at the figure. You're wrong. We're not here to fight the forest, but to end the cycle. We've learned too much. The forest was never meant to control us. We control it, together. For a moment, the figure paused, as if considering Evan's words. The light from the fire flickered in its eyes, and for just an instant, Silas saw something like fear. The figure's grip on the forest, its power, had faltered, just for a moment. Silas seized the opportunity. "We've been lost, all of us," Silas shouted. "But we're not lost anymore. We've found each other, and now we can break this." The figure's laughter died in its throat, replaced by a growl. "You cannot escape this, Silas. The forest chooses who lives and who dies. And you are nothing but a fleeting shadow in its eternal grasp." With a sudden motion, the figure raised both arms, and the fire around them flared brighter, sending a burst of heat that nearly knocked Silas off his feet. The roots beneath them twisted and writhed, and the ground beneath them split open with a deafening crack. From the depths of the chasm below, dark, tendril-like roots reached up, curling toward them like grasping fingers. Silas felt the pull, the urge to give in, to let the forest consume him, just as it had consumed Evan. He felt the weight of the forest's will trying to crush him, to force him to bend to its power. But something deep within him refused to yield. He reached out to Evan, his eyes locking with his brother's. "We're stronger than this, Evan. We are the forest's will, but we choose our own fate." Evan's gaze wavered for a moment, his lips trembling as if he wanted to speak but couldn't. The darkness in his eyes flickered, and Silas could see it, the struggle between the power of the forest and the brother he had once known. "Evan, please." Silas cried out, his voice desperate. "You don't have to do this. We can fight this together. The forest isn't everything." The figure snarled, the fire flaring with even more intensity. "Enough of your delusions. The forest is a part of us all. And now, it is time for you to join it forever." Before Silas could react, the ground beneath them began to tremble once more, the very earth splitting open. The roots surged forward, wrapping around Silas's legs, pulling him toward the chasm below. He felt the weight of the forest's power pushing down on him, dragging him into the darkness. But then, a burst of light erupted from within him. It was the night. The energy that had been locked inside it flared to life, its glow blinding, surging with an intensity that pushed back against the forest's pull. Silas gritted his teeth and fought against the force, his hands gripping the night tightly. He raised it high, and as he did, the roots recoiled, the darkness retreating, as if the forest itself was afraid. The figure let out a howl, its voice filled with rage. "You cannot defeat me. You cannot defeat the forest." But Silas, his heart pounding with newfound strength, stepped forward. "We are the forest. We are its will. But we choose our fate, and this is our world, not yours." With that, he thrust the night into the ground, the power of its light exploding outward, washing over the entire clearing. The roots shrieked, recoiling as if burned by the light, and the figure staggered back, its form flickering, distorting in the radiance. No. No. The figure screamed, its voice rising in desperation. You cannot undo what has been done. The forest will always rise again. But Silas, with Evan standing beside him, knew that they had already broken the cycle. The roots continued to retreat, the fire flickering out, and the figure, whatever it had been, began to dissolve, its form disintegrating into the air. The forest was silent. And then, for the first time in what felt like eternity, the ground was still. Evan turned to Silas, his eyes wide, filled with a mixture of disbelief and relief. We did it, he whispered. It's over. Silas nodded, his breath coming in shaky bursts. The night in his hand had stopped glowing, but its warmth lingered. He had no idea what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. We'll rebuild, Evan, Silas said softly. Together. The air was no longer thick with malice. The trees were no longer twisting with dark energy. The forest was still alive, but it had been freed from its chains, freed from the darkness that had nearly consumed them both. They had done it. And now, the true journey could begin. Chapter 17, The New Dawn. The forest was still. The fire that had burned so brightly just moments ago had died down, leaving only the faint smell of smoke in the air. The sky above was clear, the storm that had raged within the forest now gone. The trees, though ancient and towering, stood silently now, as if recovering from a long, dark dream. Silas stood in the center of the clearing, his breath slow and steady, his heart still pounding from the battle they had just fought. Evan stood beside him, his expression a mixture of disbelief and relief. The forest around them had changed, its oppressive energy lifting, replaced by a quiet peace that was almost surreal. For the first time in what felt like forever, the air was calm. The weight of the forest's power had lifted, and with it, the darkness that had clung to Evan's soul. Silas looked around, his eyes scanning the trees that once felt like an enemy, now standing as silent witnesses to the beginning of something new. The forest was alive, but it was no longer the same forest it had been. The roots no longer twisted with dark energy, the trees no longer whispered threats. It was as if a great weight had been lifted, and in its place, there was room for something else. It's over, Evan whispered, his voice still hoarse from the struggle. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes searching the clearing. I can't believe it. Silas turned to face him, a small smile tugging at his lips. It is, he said softly. But it's only the beginning. Evan looked at him, confusion flickering in his eyes. The beginning of what? Silas's smile faded as he looked around the forest. The ground beneath them was still, the roots of the trees no longer twisting and writhing. The air was fresh, almost like it had been washed clean of the corruption that had once filled it. We have to rebuild, Silas said. Not just the forest, but the world. We've seen what happens when something is left unchecked, when power is allowed to grow without understanding. We can't let that happen again. Evan nodded slowly, his expression softening as the weight of Silas's words settled over him. I didn't understand before. I thought the forest was the power. But now, I see. It was never just about control. It was about balance. Silas placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, giving him a reassuring squeeze. Exactly. The forest is part of everything. It's alive, but it needs guidance. It needs to coexist with us, not dominate us. The trees around them seemed to agree, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling in harmony with the wind. It was as if the forest had heard them, had understood the need for balance. And for the first time in a long time, Silas felt a deep sense of peace settle in his chest. But that peace was fleeting. The battle they had just won wasn't the end of their journey, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. There was still work to be done. What do we do now? Evan asked, his voice quieter now, his eyes searching the horizon. Silas looked out across the forest, his gaze thoughtful. We rebuild, he said again. We learn from our mistakes and help the forest heal. And we make sure that the darkness we fought doesn't come back. Evan's gaze shifted to the knight still clutched in Silas's hand, its wooden surface worn from the battles they had fought. The knight was no longer just a symbol of childhood games. It was a symbol of their strength, of the bond they shared. And it was a reminder that they could face whatever came next, together. Do you think the forest will ever be truly free? Evan asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Do you think we can ever undo the damage that's been done? Silas paused, considering the question. The forest had changed, yes, but so had they. The power of the forest was still there, deep in the earth, in the roots, in the very air they breathed. But now, Silas understood that the forest wasn't something to be controlled or conquered. It was something to be respected. I don't know, Silas said softly. But I think that's the point. We can't undo everything, but we can build something new. We can make sure the forest, and everything it touches, is balanced. Not ruled, not destroyed, balanced. Evan nodded, a quiet understanding settling in his eyes. I think I understand now, he said. We're part of the forest, Silas. Always have been. And now, we have to make sure it's part of us, too. The weight of Evan's words hung in the air between them. It was a realization that had taken time, that had come at a great cost. But it was the truth. They were part of the forest, and the forest was part of them. And together, they could guide it towards something better. Silas glanced up at the sky, the fading light of dusk casting long shadows across the clearing. The path ahead was still uncertain, but it was a path they would walk together. The journey was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. We can do this, Silas said, his voice filled with conviction. We can make it right. Together. Evan gave a small, uncertain smile, but it was enough. The bond between them, once frayed and broken, was now stronger than ever. The forest had tested them, had torn them apart, but now it was time for them to rebuild it and themselves into something stronger. The journey would be long. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But Silas was no longer afraid. With Evan by his side, with the strength of the night and the knowledge they had gained, he knew they could face whatever came next. And so, together, they turned toward the path that lay ahead, walking into the new dawn of a world reborn. Chapter 18, The Path Ahead. The clearing around them seemed to breathe with a quiet calm, as if the forest itself was adjusting to the newfound peace that Silas and Evan had forged. The last echoes of the battle were fading, replaced by the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional song of birds that had returned to the trees. The land, though scarred by the events of the past, was healing, slowly but surely. But Silas knew this was just the beginning. They had broken the forest's hold, but there was still so much to be done. The damage was not just to the land, but to the very balance of nature. The roots had been torn, the energy disrupted, and the darkness that had once held Evan captive still lingered beneath the surface. As they walked deeper into the forest, Silas couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. He and Evan had survived, but the forest had not. It had been a part of them, a part of the world they had known. And now, they had to ensure it would never fall back into the darkness again. Evan walked beside him, his steps slow but steady. He was still adjusting, still coming to terms with what had happened to him. His eyes were distant, lost in thought, as if he were still processing the depth of the transformation he had undergone. But there was a quiet determination in his gaze that Silas hadn't seen before. The forest had tried to consume him, but now he was a part of something larger, something that had the power to heal. "What do we do now?" Evan asked, his voice low and thoughtful. Silas glanced at him, his expression serious. "We rebuild. But not just the forest. We need to understand what happened. We need to know how to prevent this from ever happening again." Evan nodded, his gaze flickering to the path ahead. "You think we can fix it? All of it?" Silas took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the wooden knight at his side. "We can try. The forest isn't just a place, Evan. It's a force. It's alive, connected to everything. We can't control it, but we can learn from it. We can guide it, restore the balance." Evan paused, his eyes scanning the trees around them. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and fresh growth. The trees were still standing, their roots buried deep in the soil, but Silas could feel their power beneath the surface. The forest was waking, just as they were. And like them, it would take time to heal. "How do we even start?" Evan asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Silas looked ahead, his gaze focused on the path that wound deeper into the heart of the forest. We start by listening. By understanding the forest. The roots that have been twisted by the darkness need to be undone. We need to reconnect with the land, with the earth beneath us, and bring it back to balance. Evan didn't say anything for a moment, his eyes lost in thought. And what about the figure? The one who tried to stop us. The one who said the forest would never be free. Silas's heart tightened at the thought. The figure, the one who had been the embodiment of the forest's dark will, had disappeared into the shadows, but its words still echoed in Silas's mind. The forest might have been free of its influence for now, but Silas knew there were still forces at work, forces that would stop at nothing to regain control. "We can't let that happen again," Silas said firmly, his voice full of resolve. "We'll find out more about that figure. We need to understand what it wanted, why it was so powerful. And we'll make sure no one else falls under its sway." Evan nodded, his face hardening with determination. "I won't let it happen again either. We've been through too much." Silas reached out, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Together, we'll make sure it never happens again." The two of them continued on, the path ahead winding through the trees, their footsteps muffled by the soft carpet of leaves and moss beneath them. The forest was still, but there was a sense of purpose in the air now, a quiet energy that seemed to pulse with every step they took. As they ventured deeper into the woods, Silas couldn't help but feel the weight of the land's history pressing down on them. The forest had been here long before them, and it would be here long after. The events of the past, the battles, the darkness, the struggle for control were just a small part of its story. But Silas knew that their actions, the choices they made, would be the ones that shaped the future. They reached a clearing, and for the first time, the full scope of the forest's transformation became clear. The trees around them were standing tall, their trunks thick and strong, their leaves vibrant and green. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of new growth. The ground beneath them was soft, but there was no longer the oppressive weight of the roots, the twisted power that had once bound the land. Silas took a deep breath, feeling the life around him. The forest had begun to heal, but it wasn't just the land that needed healing, it was them, too. He and Evan had been through so much, had seen so much darkness, but now they were standing at the edge of something new. It was a new beginning, a new dawn. "This is where it starts," Silas said softly, his voice full of hope. "This is where we make things right. Not just for the forest, but for everyone. We rebuild from here." Evan looked around, his gaze softening as he took in the transformation. "I don't know what the future holds, Silas," he said quietly. "But I know we can do this. We've already survived the worst. We'll rebuild." Silas nodded, his heart swelling with pride. They had been through so much, but they had survived. And now, they were going to do more than survive. They were going to rebuild, to restore balance, and to protect the forest from the darkness that had tried to consume it. They stood together in the clearing, side by side, knowing that the path ahead was uncertain, but full of possibility. The forest was alive again, and so were they. The journey was far from over, but they had taken the first step. The new dawn had arrived. Chapter 19, The Legacy. The sun had barely risen, casting soft rays across the forest floor as Silas and Evan ventured deeper into the heart of the woods. The air was crisp with the promise of a new beginning, and though the shadows of the past lingered, the forest felt alive in a way it hadn't before. It was no longer just the quiet, foreboding place it had once been. It was reborn, pulsing with energy, and with that energy came both hope and uncertainty. Silas's footsteps echoed softly as he walked, his eyes scanning the path ahead. The path they had chosen was not an easy one, but it was theirs to walk. The forest, though healing, was still raw, still vulnerable. He and Evan had fought hard to break the hold the darkness had on it, but they both knew that the forest was more than just a place. It was a living, breathing entity with its own will, its own memories, and its own secrets. The roots that had once bound it with such dark power were now being carefully untangled, but the damage was still there, hidden beneath the surface. "Do you think we can really do this?" Evan asked quietly, his voice carrying a note of doubt. His hand brushed against the bark of a nearby tree, his fingers lingering as though seeking some sort of connection, something to anchor him. Silas glanced at him, seeing the uncertainty in his brother's eyes. They had both changed, both grown stronger and yet more fragile in the process. The battle they had fought was not just against the forest's dark forces but against the very essence of their own fears. And while they had won, the scars were not easily healed. "We've already started," Silas said, his voice steady. "We've already faced the worst. Now, we just have to rebuild. One step at a time." Evan nodded, but there was a heaviness in his expression, a lingering doubt that Silas couldn't ignore. He knew that the journey ahead would not be easy for either of them. They had fought against the forest's darkness, but they had also fought against themselves. The past, with its darkness and secrets, would always be a part of them. The path ahead was unclear. There were no guarantees that the forest would ever be free of the shadows that had once consumed it, but there was a glimmer of hope now. A chance to build something new. As they walked deeper into the woods, the air grew thick with the sounds of life. Birds chirped from the trees, and small animals scurried across the forest floor, unafraid. The forest was waking, and it was beautiful. It wasn't the same forest they had known, but it was a start. It was theirs to protect. They came to a clearing, and Silas paused, his gaze falling on the heart of the forest. In the center, the ancient altar they had once fought over stood, now surrounded by lush greenery. It was still a monument to the past, but it had changed. The air around it seemed lighter, more open. "This is where it all began," Evan said softly, his voice carrying a mix of reverence and sorrow. "This is where we were both lost, and now, it's where we start again." Silas stepped forward, his hand brushing the surface of the altar. It was smooth now, no longer covered in the ancient moss and grime that had once obscured its surface. The roots that had once twisted through it had retreated, leaving behind only the remnants of what had been. The altar was no longer a symbol of darkness but of rebirth. "It's up to us now," Silas said, his voice quiet but filled with resolve. "We can't undo what's been done, but we can choose how we move forward. We can protect this place, help it heal, and make sure it's never lost again." Evan stood beside him, his gaze fixed on the altar. "You're right. We've been given a chance. A chance to rebuild, to make things right. And I won't let the darkness take this place again." The two brothers stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history and the challenges that lay ahead hanging heavy in the air. But there was something else now, something that hadn't been there before. A sense of possibility, of purpose, of something new beginning. The forest around them seemed to shift in response, the breeze stirring the leaves in the trees. It wasn't just the wind. It was the forest itself, listening, responding, and healing. "We have to be careful," Silas continued, his voice thoughtful. "The forest is a living thing, Evan. It's connected to everything. We can't control it, but we can guide it. We have to make sure that the balance is restored." Evan nodded, his expression serious. "I know. I've seen what happens when we don't. The darkness, it creeps in. It's subtle, but it's there. We have to make sure we don't lose our way." Silas turned to face his brother, a small smile on his lips. "We won't. We're not alone. We have each other." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Evan smiled back. It wasn't a smile filled with the weight of uncertainty or the burden of the past. It was a smile of hope, of a future they could build together. "Together," Evan echoed. The brothers stood in the clearing, their resolve strengthening with every passing moment. The forest, though forever changed, was theirs to protect. They had come so far, but the journey was far from over. There were still challenges to face, still secrets to uncover, but Silas and Evan knew they were ready. The new dawn had begun, not just for the forest, but for them as well. They had fought the darkness, and now it was time to rebuild the world they had once known, to heal the wounds that had been left behind. And with that, they began their journey forward, together. Final chapter, the legacy lives on. The forest had come alive. It was a feeling Silas couldn't quite explain. He had stood in the heart of the woods many times before, but this was different. The air was lighter, clearer, filled with an energy he hadn't felt in years. The trees, once twisted and dark, now stood tall and strong, their branches stretching toward the sky in peaceful harmony. The roots no longer writhed with dark energy. Instead, they seemed to pulse gently with life, grounding the earth in ways that felt natural, balanced. Silas and Evan stood together in the clearing, side by side. It had been years since they had first set foot in this very place, when they had faced the darkness that had consumed their world. But now, it was different. The weight of the past had been lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and renewal. Evan turned to Silas, his expression thoughtful. "I never imagined this," he said, his voice a soft murmur. "That one day, we would be standing here, free of the darkness, able to rebuild." Silas smiled, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. "We did it, Evan. We fought for this." Evan's gaze softened as he looked around at the trees, the clearing, the land they had saved together. "It's not just about us, is it? The forest. It's alive. It's a part of us, just as much as we are a part of it. We've been through so much, and now, it's our turn to protect it." Silas nodded, his hand resting on the wooden knight at his side. "Exactly. The forest is more than just a place. It's a force. A living force that we must honor and protect. It's up to us now to ensure that what we've built doesn't fall back into the darkness." The two brothers stood in silence, the weight of their responsibility settling in. The road ahead was uncertain, but Silas knew that they had the strength to face whatever came their way. They had each other, and that was more than enough. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the clearing. The golden light bathed the trees, illuminating the vibrant green leaves and the soft, moss-covered ground. It was a moment of peace, a moment of reflection. But Silas knew that peace could never be taken for granted. The balance they had restored was fragile, and it was up to them to protect it. Evan glanced at Silas, his voice serious but filled with resolve. "We have a legacy now, Silas. We freed the forest, and we freed ourselves. But we can't forget that the darkness we fought is still out there, still waiting for its chance to rise again." Silas turned to his brother, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. "We won't forget. We'll stand guard, protect this place, and make sure that the forest remains free. Our legacy is more than just what we've done, it's about what we leave behind. And we'll make sure it's a legacy that lasts." The wind stirred gently through the trees, the sound of rustling leaves filling the air. It was a sound of peace, of nature's harmony. Silas could feel it deep within him, the promise of a new beginning, not just for the forest, but for them, for the world they had saved. "What happens now?" Evan asked quietly, his voice full of a mix of hope and uncertainty. Silas smiled, his heart filled with a quiet joy. "Now, we live. We rebuild. We protect the future, and we make sure that what we've fought for is never lost." Evan nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "Together." Silas held his brother's gaze, knowing that this was only the beginning of the journey. The forest was no longer just a place of darkness, it was a living entity, a part of them, and they would fight to protect it for as long as it needed them. The last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, leaving the clearing bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The forest, once again at peace, stood still, as if waiting for them to take the next step. The journey had been long, but the legacy they had created would live on. It would be passed down through the generations, a story of survival, of hope, and of the bond between the land and its people. Silas and Evan stood together, side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The world they had saved was theirs to protect, and together, they would ensure that the darkness never rose again. "Let's go," Silas said softly, his voice full of conviction. "The future awaits." And with that, they stepped forward, the path ahead stretching out before them, filled with endless possibilities. They were no longer just survivors, they were the guardians of the forest, the keepers of its legacy. And as they walked, side by side, they knew that they had made the world a better place. Together, they would face the future, and whatever came their way, they would face it as one. The legacy of the forest lived on.